Hi, my name is Jill Van Dijvendyk, and today we're going to be touching on container gardening basics. Now, spring is almost here, and it's a little bit early to start getting your containers going, but there's a lot of thought that's going to go into it. So I want to give you some tips and tricks on how you can be successful and sort of to start your thinking process going so that you can start dreaming of your garden and what it's going to look like in spring. So first off, again, what we have to talk about is what plants are going to do well in the area that you have. Now, vegetable gardening is really big right now, and we have small spaces sometimes. So getting those vegetables into containers is something that a lot of people are doing. Now, if you're wanting to grow vegetables in your containers, you will need at least 8 to 10 hours of sunlight hours. So planting them, making sure that you have a nice south or west exposure is really important to get those vegetables growing. So if you want tomatoes in your containers, you need a south or west exposure. If you have an east or a north exposure and you're wanting to do some edibles, then you might want to stick more with the herbs in your garden or the leafy vegetables like your lettuces and Swiss chard. So that's one thing to watch. Bright light, bright indirect light, low light. Bright light areas are a south and west facing exposure. Low light areas are a east or north facing exposure. So next thing with your location that you want to look at is if it's a bright, hot area, you want to make sure you have a large enough container. So making sure that you don't have a tiny little container that's going to dry out in a south exposure. You're going to be watering that 3 or 4 times a day in the heat of the summer. So making sure you have a large enough container. The other thing too is making sure we're going to be watering these plants outside often, so making sure you have drainage. That means you have holes in the bottom of your container. So this guy here does not have a hole in the bottom, so I can just take a drill. There's usually a little spot or a dot in the bottom of the container where you should be drilling. Drill a hole in the bottom of the container, then this is going to be sustainable for your flowers. Our season, we're kind of wondering when is it okay to plant them in and outside. I say when your nighttime temperatures are getting to be about 5 to 10 degrees at night, it's okay to put your plants outside. But I love having these little saucers on wheels. I'll set my plants on them. I remember when I was little, my grandma used to take a big sheet of plywood and my grandpa put wheels on the bottom and she would roll all of her plants in and out of the garage every night until it got warmer. So make sure that you're hardening your plants off, putting them out during the day, bringing them in at night, watching those nighttime temperatures. Usually in Saskatchewan, we're seeing our nighttime temperatures safe enough to put our plants outside just after the May long weekend to the first weekend in June. So remember, watch those nighttime temperatures about 5 degrees, and then for more your tender annuals like your tropicals or impatiens or begonias, you want those nighttime temperatures to be sitting around 10 degrees before it's safe to have them outside so they're not getting any frost. That's really important. Another container type that I have is this moss basket, and this is a cocoa liner basket, and it's very porous. So before I plant in this, I will actually take a plastic bag and I'll pop a bunch of holes in it and I'll lay it in the bottom of this container, and then I'll fill it with soil. What that's going to do is it's going to eliminate that wind going through the container and drying out my pot so fast. The other little tip and trick I have is adding a little bit of soil moist to the soil. Now, if you can think of this, it's like those little gel crystals. They'll swell up and they'll hold moisture. So your plant's going to use the moisture that's in these gel crystals. So if you have an area that just you can't keep enough moisture in that plant, or maybe at the lake, you want to throw this in there, this soil moist really works. Now make sure you follow the directions on the back of the package, because if you put too much in, your soil's actually going to swell out of your pot. So make sure you put the right amount in your container. So yeah, lots of different container options. If you're choosing a vegetable or putting a tomato in a pot, make sure you choose a big enough pot. Remember, that tomato plant is going to get quite big, and sometimes I like to plant some flowers around the front of it. So make sure you pick out a plant container that's at least 14 to 24 inches in diameter if you're going to be doing vegetable gardening in a pot. Again, good drainage is key. Next up, we have what type of soil. Now don't just go into your garden and dig up some soil and fill your pots. That soil is not good for containers. In containers, we are watering so frequently that soil is going to compact down and it's going to be hard like cement, and those little fibrous roots in your plants are not going to be able to penetrate them. So make sure you grab a good container soil. I like the Pro Mix or the Miracle-Gro mix. It works great. and it's nice and light. A lot of them have wetting agents in it, which means it's going to dry evenly from top to bottom, so you're not going to have to worry about watering. Now, another question I have is, how often should I water, Jill? And I say it depends on the area. In the heat of the summer, you might have to water in the morning and then also in the late afternoon. I try not to water my plants right before I go to bed. I like to water them in the morning better, because then that plant has time to dry out. Whereas at night, our plants will sweat naturally, so then you might have more chances of fungal, or maybe it's going to rain overnight and then you watered it and then it's going to rain and then you have your plant that's just saturated. So water in the morning, allow it to dry out during those daylight hours of the summer days. So grab a nice soil, fill it up with your pot. I usually will fill my pot up about almost right to the top and then plant right into it. A nice soilless mix is best to use for your garden. Make sure you're starting with the right tools. Next up I want to talk to you about is food for your plants. These plants are being watered often. Like I said, sometimes we're watering them once or 2 times a day. So it's really important we're feeding the plants often. So for some of my vegetative annuals, like your petunias, your verbena, a lot of those vegetative million bells, they require a lot of nutrients. So we need to be able to fertilize them. You can even do it twice a week with a water-soluble fertilizer, or you can do a slow-release fertilizer, which are these little granules here. I'm going to open this guy up. These little granules, and you can sprinkle them on the top of your pot, and it will give it feed for about 3 to 6 months. So that works really well. And with my vegetative plants, I will always top it up with a little bit of water-soluble on top of it, but at least we're not starving our plants. There's a few different types of fertilizer that you can use. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are the 3 numbers that you're going to see on your container, and they all do a little bit different things. So when I'm starting my plants, I will start with a 52-10 fertilizer. So that phosphorus level, you're going to want it to be nice and high. Just for that one first watering, it will get those roots established and get those plants growing nicely. And then if I have a vegetative plant, I'll switch to a 20-20-20 fertilizer. So this is great for the majority of your annuals. Just an all-purpose fertilizer will work great. 20-20-20 or a 28-20 works really good. Lowering down that phosphorus in the middle will help it promote growth to the top of the plant, so your plant is looking nice and bushy and full. Now maybe you have a plant that needs a little bit extra oomph to get it to re-bloom for you, like your Gerber daisies, your New Guinea impatiens, or even your begonias. And I'll like to use a 15-30-15 fertilizer. So I have lower side numbers, a bigger center number there, 15-30-15 fertilizer. That will help that plant re-bloom continuously all summer long. Another thing that we're wanting to do is continue to deadhead our plants. Remember, the life cycle of an annual is to grow, to bloom, so that it can reproduce, and then it dies. So if we keep pinching off the blooms before they go to seed, the plant says, oh no, I have to restart again, and then it will continue to bloom all season long. So deadheading your plants are really great. The other thing is you can buy a lot of hybrid plants right now that are also bred so that they don't go to seed. Those ones are usually germinated by cuttings, and they will continually bloom all summer long. So a great plant like that is some of your petunias, your verbenas, your million bells or calibrachoa. Those plants will continue to bloom all summer long. You can pinch and trim them to get them to bush out more, but they will continue to bloom without deadheading. Once we have our plants growing, these little guys were planted about 2 weeks ago, and you can see we've got some nice new growth on them. And what we want to do is we want to give some pruning. So when they get about this tall, so about 4 inches tall, I want to prune the tips out of my plants. And for everywhere I do a prune, I'm going to get 4 or 5 different branches coming from that point. So if I want this one just to be one long little branch, I'll leave it as is. But if I want it to be nice and bushy, give it a little pinch and prune, and that plant's going to flourish and be nice and full for you. So in our greenhouse, we've done about 1 pinch right now. We'll do another pinch in about 3 weeks. And then throughout the season, we'll give our plant little pinches just to keep it bushy so it doesn't get long and lanky. Another question I get too is, how should I arrange my plants in my container? And this is a great question. Now, I don't have a lot of annuals in stock right now, but I'll show you with this little arrangement that I have. So what I've done here is we have a feature plant. I'm going to move this off to the side so you can see a little bit better. Here we go. So we have a feature plant, which is my hyacinth in here. So think of that as maybe being a nice cypress tree, or you could do a nice flower like a salvia, something a little bit taller in the back. You could do some grasses. So a feature plant, and then we have some accent plants. So we got our filler, spiller, something that's spilling off the side, and then a thriller, something that's coming up. So 3 components: a thriller, a filler, and then something spilling out the front. Those 3 components, if you have them in your container, think you need something upright, something that's going to be bushy, and then something that's going to trail out. You'll get a nice even container every time. We were talking a little bit about watering before, and when I'm watering my container, it's important not just to take your wand and water on top of the flowers. If you want longer bloom time of your plants, go right into the soil. So just lift the plant up and go right into the soil around on each container. If I have a hanging basket, I'll actually water enough so that the water is draining out the bottom of the pot, and that will help leach any of the extra salts that are in that soil out throughout the season. Other things I like to have in my toolkit is a garden fungicide. So if you see any powdery mildew, which is almost like a white powdery film that you see on your leaves, that's a fungus that's spread by spores in the air. And just spraying it with a fungicide will help kill that and help prevent it from spreading. You'll see this a lot on cucumbers, petunias, verbena, those types of things, but I like to have some garden fungicide, which is a sulfur-based product that will help prevent funguses in your garden. Endol is also another one. I have it in my toolkit for my house plants, and I keep it for my annuals and vegetables too. Just spray it on the plant when I see those little pesky aphids or spider mites, and it will help keep them at bay. Another great tool that I love to have in my garden is one of these little adapters for my hose for my fertilizer. I like to have lots of flowers all over my yard, so carrying buckets of water with fertilizer doesn't necessarily do me justice. So what I will do is I will get one of these hose end feeders, the garden feeders. You clip it onto your hose, you put your fertilizer in, and then when you go to water it maybe twice a week, you just give it a little bit of water first with clean water to get the soil nice and moist. You never want to be fertilizing a dry plant, and then go around and give it a good fertilizer with the wand. And it's just an easier way so that you're not breaking your back with hauling that fertilizer around. There is so many different types of organic options when it comes to fertilizing. So a lot of us are doing more edibles in our containers, and there is a lot of different options for organic fertilizers. So we have some slow release fertilizers here. I love this Evolve product. It's actually a Manitoba based company, so very local here, and I love the Evolve organic products. There's so many in their line, but they have some for fruits, they have some for evergreens, they have some for annuals, and they also have some for vegetables. So this one here, I love the Evolve product line. The other thing, if you have tomatoes or if you're a tomato gardener, is making sure you have a fertilizer with a little bit extra calcium in it. That will help prevent that blossom end rot. Blossom end rot is when the ends of your tomatoes, they start looking like they're brown and rotten. This is caused by one of 2 things: a calcium deficiency, so a lack of nutrients in your soil, and also inconsistent watering, so making them go dry, then wet, then dry, then wet. You'll start to see blossom end rot. So adding calcium into your plants for your tomatoes is something that will help a lot. Now, last thing we're going to talk about, I don't have an array of vegetables to show you right now. Usually at Gardenscape we would be planting up all these nice vegetables, but I'm going to show you some of the different seed packages of some of my favorite tomatoes. So when I'm choosing the tomatoes to go into my containers, there's 2 types of tomatoes. There's a determinate variety and an indeterminate variety. So that's a determinate variety. The size is already determined on the plant. And then there's an indeterminate variety, which meaning that plant is going to get big and big and big and require staking. Those ones are great for the garden. We want to stick with a variety that's determinate and that will grow great into a pot. So it's going to be a maintainable size for you in the garden. Now, I like to have a cherry tomato. My favorite cherry tomato is a tumbler tomato. It's just about a little bit smaller than a ping pong ball. It's nice and sweet, great for salads. Love the tumbler tomato right here. If you want a nice slicing tomato, great for those hamburgers off the grill. There's the beefsteak, which a lot of you may know, but for a container, I will use the bush beefsteak, which is a determinate variety of the beefsteak, and this one here will be great for a container. Now, maybe you like doing some pastas or making salsas. You'll want to make sure you have a Roma tomato. And some of the great Roma tomatoes that we have, you get a window box Roma, and that's a determinate variety of the old-fashioned Roma tomato that was indeterminate, and that plant grew huge. So just make sure that you grab the right variety of tomatoes for your space in your containers. when I am putting other plants and other vegetables and edibles into my containers, I love to think of how it's going to look with maybe some flowers. So maybe some Swiss chard. I love this Swiss chard called Bright Lights. It has a very vibrant stem in all different colors. And with any of my leafy vegetables like my cilantro and my basil and even my lettuce, I will undersow. So I will sow a little bit of seed into my containers, and then I'll wait about 2 weeks and I'll sow a little bit more seed. That way I can be using my crops and I've got new fresh crops coming up all season long. So with your leafy vegetables, you can direct seed right into your containers and undersow, or maybe buy a plant that's a little bit bigger and then sprinkle little seeds, a few seeds underneath it, and that way you'll have some of those leafy edibles all season long. Right now, you'll want to be getting started on, if you're wanting to plant your herbs from seed, your mint, your rosemary, your thyme, anything that's a little bit more of a woodier herb, you'll want to start those inside the house right now in a seed container, just like this one here. And when I'm getting started in my seed containers, I have put the soil in here. I've put 1 or 2 seeds in each little hole, and you can start seeing I'm starting to get some germination happening here. I'll wait till I get about 60% to 80% germination rate before I take this off. Once I take this off in that plant and I start to get that first set of leaves, it's really important to decrease the humidity and the heat at that point in time to keep your plants nice and short so they're not long and stringy. This is especially important for our tomato plants. So there we go. I hope we have a little bit of inspiration of how we can get started with container gardening this spring season. Make sure, if you have any questions, visit us online at dutchgrowers.com or head to our Instagram page for more inspiration at @DutchSaskatoon.